So IEM San Jose is coming up, so I want to talk about kind of three different things concerning this tournament. First and foremost, I want to talk about the patch, the physical 5.21 patch that will be played on, including champion and meta trends. Secondly, I want to talk about the tournament implications and what this will actually mean in the grand scheme, the global context of things. And then third and foremost, I want to talk about the team expectations concerning the implications of what the tournament actually means. So first, let's break down the patch. Now, I want to break down the patch based on what I think the current iteration of the meta is in terms of what we saw in Kespa Cup, and then kind of the big primary champions and the champion pools that we should expect to see. So 5.21, just like 5.18 at Worlds, and I think SKT defined this best, is a very structure-focused meta. And what I think that means is taking the first tier of outer towers as quickly as possible, not necessarily or always in a fast push sense, but just prioritizing and weighting those above other objectives like Dragon. And by taking the first tier tower wing, you're then amassing a global gold because towers and structures will give you global gold, whereas the Dragon will not, and then taking that amassed lead and moving that into either third or second dragon fight for the 5v5. So amassing a global gold lead through small advantages on structure or macro structure movements, and then taking that into the team fight by using the dragon timer as kind of a lure. So how does this work in with the current kind of top tier champions on 5.21. Now, the first champion that I want to speak to is Kindred. So Kindred was enabled on Kespa Cup. We saw her banned quite a few times. She was played very limited times, but almost had a 100% win rate, except when SKT was able to beat her. Although I think in that particular instance, it was more so the failings of the Kindred specific player in that set versus the power of Kindred maybe being exposed or questioned. So if you haven't looked at Kindred, I think the biggest issue with her kit right now is that she gets too much power based of RNG or random pathing. And the reason why I state this is specifically in how her passive interacts with jungle camps and jungle creeps. So the idea, I suspect, is to weight the choice between mixing up your jungle pathing if you see a marked camp show up and diverging from your jungle pathing to secure that, and then also weighting that against if I mark an enemy champion and I look for a gank by picking up my passive on the marked champion as well as snowballing my lane with the added pressure. But the problem here is I think it's just too easy with normal pathing and flow to pick up random generated passive marks, because on the jungle creeps you can stack it up to 6 times, and that is a lot of free damage that Kindred can very easily acquire early. Now the counterplay to this, and we saw this effectively done by CJ Intis in particular, is that they're able to, if you see the marked camp, you can actually use this as a lure to try to fight Kindred in 1v1 duels or set up traps. So I think that offers interesting and unique counterplay, but I just think it's a little bit too random to engineer and manufacture that effectively in terms of counterplay. And likewise, again, if you're just normal pathing and flow, chances are that you could have multiple marks appear just without changing any sort of decision making. I think giving away free power when you're not making intelligent decisions is a bit out of whack, and I think that shows in Kindred's overall strength. Now, in terms of play style, with synergy or anti-synergy with Kindred, I want to first talk about kind of synergy and champions that will work really well with Kindred. Now, Kindred is going to be a hyper carry, 80 carry jungler. And her big thing is her Lamb's Respite as well as her damage that she can output on her auto attacks if she's given space, because obviously with Wolf's Frenzy and with Dance of Arrows, she's very high mobility. She's kind of like Vayne, she can dance around a team fight. But the Lamb's Respite is very cool because it's a very excellent anti-dive tool, and that's especially potent when Lissandra is very powerful and when tower diving in general is fairly potent, just because it gives you a really nice option. Now, the caveat to this is that it's an anti-dive tool, but it also helps your allies. So champions that will synergize well with anti-dive tools are going to be champions like, Lissandra, if she doesn't want to be that long-range engage tool with the Glacial Path into the Frozen Tomb, if she just wants to sit in the back and use her Frozen Tomb, she has the versatility to do that with Lamb's Respite. Bard, I mean, it's pretty obvious there. You throw the Lamb's Respite, you can time it really well with Bard Ultimate, and, no one's breaking through. Cassiopeia, I don't necessarily think that Cassiopeia is in the current meta, but the same kind of concept that when you had a Vayne, you'd see a lot of Cassiopeias just because diving onto the diving onto the Vayne is very dangerous to the Cassiopeia standing right there just due to her ultimate. Vigar, the Event Horizon, again, can be used as a long-range engage or an AoE engage, but can also be used as a primary disengage. So Lamb's Respite with Event Horizon could be really awesome. So things like that. Likewise, champions like Callista and Kindred. Kindred has incredible objective control just because, again, by gathering these passive stacks, she's able to ramp up her auto attack damage very quickly and very effectively, and it can really help her burn down objectives like Baron in particular. Now, obviously, this works really well with Callista because Callista has incredible objective control with her Rend, so a lot of times you will see Kindreds and Callistas on the same team, and it pretty much guarantees, Dragon and Barons for free. Other champions like Shin and Malphite. Again, if you're thinking about the objective control with Kindred, she is very capable, if she has the sufficient amount of passive stacks, to burn Baron at 20 minutes, to sneak Baron. She just needs a really tanky member to do it with her, like Malphite, like Shin. I still think that Fiora is the undisputed queen of the top lane in 5.21, but we did see a lot of we did see some Malphites and some Shins being used in tandem with Kindred to open up this possibility of a Snuck Baron just because they're able to go over the back wall, especially when playing from purple side. Okay, on the other side, champions that work really well against Kindred. Number one, I think Gragas. And the reason why is how the cask is interacting with Lamb's Respite. So again, Lamb's Respite will give invulnerability and health back to every single member on the map, not just the ally team, but also to the enemy team. What's brilliant about Gragas is he has this beautiful cask where if everyone's fighting on the 5v5, Gragas can drop the cask, disengage all of the enemies, and take all of the benefits of the Lamb's Respite without Kindred's team getting it. And I think that is very potent and powerful. Now in a 1v1 duel, still going to give that to Kindred, but Gragas is very tanky, he's got a lot of CC, and he also has high mobility. In the end, I think the 1v1 Duelist Master is still going to be kind of Elise versus Kindred, although Kindred is a great answer to Elise just because she has the multi-arrows, and she's able to clear out the spiderlings as well as do a lot of damage to Elise herself. But I think Elise is still very strong in the 1v1, but you do not want to run into Kindred in a dark alley unless you can get that CC cocoon lock. Moving on to Elise in particular. So Elise is still kind of the big primary jungle that we saw in Casper Cup, especially for priority pick, if Kindred is banned. If Kindred was available, majority of the time we saw Kindred picked over Elise. So why is Elise potent and powerful? I think it goes back to, again, she's got great cost-efficient itemization right now. She's very self-sufficient in the jungler. She stays healthy. She's got pick potential, execution potential, great tower dive potential just because of how she can affect aggro with her repel, but more importantly, she's really good at structure control. She can take structures for pretty much free if Elise scuttles into a lane because of the attack steroid with her spiderlings. And this has always been the case of Elise, and I think it's also, why she continues to remain very strong in the current iteration of the meta. And again, the fact that taking the tier 1 tower, so it's not just the fact that, she's got great tower dives, which are very potent, because again, you can get into these lane swap scenarios where it's kind of like a 4v2 fast push, I use the term very lightly, or if it becomes a 4v0, Elise is obviously incredibly potent at taking down the towers or helping her team quickly take down the towers, but it's also Elise's pick potential, the fact that by taking down the tier 1 towers fairly early, you're opening a lot of space, and the Korean teams are very good at engineering and manufacturing places to fight on the map in that open space, which means that pick champions like Elise are incredibly potent. Now, the differences, you could be like, oh yeah, well that's obvious that most teams want to do it. But it's kind of like the difference between Chinese and Korean League of Legends is that the Chinese teams will use, they're very good at fighting around, like Chinese teams are great around fighting Dragon and Baron Pit and using terrain and choke points. Where the Korean teams elevate this is that they're good at manufacturing the same fights that the Chinese teams are looking for around the Dragon and Baron pits, but the Chinese teams are using the Dragon and Baron pits as a crutch because they're on the timer. You have to come and fight us, and we've set this up. Whereas the Korean teams are much more accessible about using vision and the open space created by not having the towers there to engineer fights on blue or red or over this ward or in this specific choke point or around this brush. And so just the flexibility and the mobility. Of being able to move these fights on different aspects of the map, I think puts them, or puts their general meta ahead. So that's kind of the big primary difference, at least in my observation. So there's Elise. Next comes Ryze, Lissandra. Okay, Rise. I predicted that Rise would be kind of the number one mid laner coming into the Cassiopeia Cup simply because we saw the dominance and the power of Rise on 5.18 on the world stage for SKT. Now, what makes Rise potent and powerful? Why did Rise? Well, obviously, you've got innate tankiness, you have massive burst damage, you have sustained damage, you have ridiculous CC lock. I mean, Faker showed that. You can lock someone up for 4 seconds. Rise will do well in both a double teleport meta or he doesn't have to take double teleport, but he's not punished by it. And also his item breakpoints. And what I mean by an item breakpoint is when it's a power spike. It's when the champion has their core itemization and they are not at their most powerful, because obviously a champion will always be at its most powerful when it has 6 items, but when they're ready to be relevant and come online in the game and really start making a difference. So Rise's item breakpoint is going to be on 2 items. It's going to be on Rod of Ages and it's going to be on Archangels. And Rod of Ages is incredibly cost effective right now. So Rise's itemization is in itself very flexible because he can itemize really defensively if he comes up against like an assassin like LeBlanc. Or if he just gets to go into his normal standard itemization, it's still very cost effective for the power that he's getting back. Likewise, when Rise is becoming relevant in the game, it's around the 18 to 20 minute mark, depending on if you're just taking an ambient gold and CS available versus if you're able to snowball a few kills. It's around that that second to third dragon window when all of these first tier towers are coming down. So he's hitting his worth and his item breakpoints and his power spikes right when the game is really starting to ramp up. So I think it's all these little things that kind of come in and make Rise really potent and powerful. Likewise, because it's a structure focused meta, if you think about sieging in general, we saw this particularly with Vigar and his event Horizon. If you're sieging 5-on-5 and you walk up to a tower and you place your event Horizon, everyone's going to back off and you're going to get a free tower. Rise, not to the same AoE extent, but can do the same thing. If he walks up there, he's tanky enough where he can tank a few tower shots. He has enough burst damage where he can pop someone like a balloon if he gets someone, and he also has ridiculous CC lock. So it's the same concept that when a Rise approaches a tower, you still have to respect the snare. Not an event Horizon level, but you still have to back off. So it gives him siege pressure and potential with his team, despite the fact that he doesn't have great innate wave clear, which kind of comes into the next point. How do you beat Rise? So if I predict that Rise is going to be the next big powerhouse, especially in the Cassiopeia Cup, because SKT showed how powerful Rise was, what are the champions that teams are going to be looking for to deal with Rise? And the number one thing that Rise suffers with is wave clear, especially in his early levels. So I'm looking at champions that have great wave clear, that they're able to push him in, poke him out, and lock him down. So who does that mean? That means champions like Azir and Victor, first and foremost. So why don't we see a lot of Azir and Victor? I go back to the double teleport meta. Not that Azir and Victor can't run double teleport, but they don't get as much out of it as other champions. When an Azir runs teleport, it's primarily to help him take the most out of the EXP and the CS in his own lane, because if Azir teleports to a side lane, say it's bottom, he's not going to be as effective as a Rise, a Lissandra, a Vigar, a Twisted Fate dropping down there and having that immediate hard CC, having the gold card, the Event Horizon, the Snare, or the Frozen Tomb. He needs time to set up. He needs time to teleport down there, get all 3 Sand Soldiers up, make sure that they're in position, because again, people are typically going to be running away if you see the teleport in, and he's just not as effective with it. So I think that the double teleport was definitely a minor hit against Azir. Now you do have the counterplay that if your lane teleports away from you, that you can sit there and you can take the tower, but it just doesn't seem as relevant when so many teams are running global ultimates and both teleports and everyone's making plays on these side lanes. Now Victor is in the same boat. Now Victor's not as inhibited by Azir in terms that he can teleport in and he can immediately drop his damage, but he doesn't have the mobility or the safety that Azir will have, because he doesn't have the Emperor's Divide and he doesn't have the Sand Soldier, what is it? the jump, the dash. When Victor's down, he's very low mobility, he's very susceptible to being dove on. He's pretty much got his gravitational field and he has a speed up on his Q, but that's about it. So it's this idea that Azir and Victor were both hit by a double teleport meta. Not that they're completely not viable anymore, because they are viable. They're just not the cream of the crop. They're not as great as they once were. So if Victor and Azir are just slightly down tuned because of the teleport, and then if you see a Victor and Azir, that opens up Rise for the idea that I don't have to take teleport because chances are they won't take teleport. Chances are that they're going to take cleanse or something like that. So I can take Ghost. You're just giving more power to the Rise really, because it opens up his kill pressure significantly. Because the thing is Rise really needs that gap closer to catch up onto you. So you look at a champion like Lissandra. Now, Lissandra is not going to be punished by the double teleport meta. Like I said, the fact that she's able to come into a lane, she will immediately have that hard CC as well as the glacial path chase potential on her claw. The other thing is her wave clear is phenomenal. She can wave clear and push Rise in relatively early. She has great itemization, especially itemization that counteracts Rise's ability to burst her. That synergizes beautifully with her kit because you're looking at an Abyssal Scepter into a Zhonya's Hourglass 99% of the time. She has incredible roam potential that she doesn't need teleport to be effective on the map. So you have all of these elements. Now, obviously, the downside to Lissandra versus Rise is she's not going to scale nearly as significantly into the late game as Rise will. But you still got a lot of good stuff there. Twisted Fate, like Lissandra, like Vigar, like Rise, will still have plenty of impact in a double teleport meta, and he'll even open up even more versatility simply because he has the Destiny on top of the TP. We saw Mickey from Anarchy make some crazy macro map decisions, playing with different pressure points by having that ability to, teleport here and then Destiny over here and bait people left and right. He's obviously going to be much more fragile in terms of the 1v1 lane. If Rise ever gets a hold of Twisted Fate, that's very scary, but he'll be able to, stay safe, throw out his wild cards, look for his Destiny, get his Lucidity boots, things like that. So that's Rise and Lissandra. Now the last champion that I really want to talk about, who also has a pretty good 1v1 matchup into Rise, is Gangplank. And Gangplank was one of the most banned champions that we saw. I think he was banned 16 times. I think he was played 6 or 8 times. Now before the final, between Ever and CJ Intis, Gangplank actually had a 33% win rate, the lowest of any champion that was banned as much as him. Rise, Lissandra, Lulu, Elise, Kindred all had higher win rates than Gangplank, as well as they were prioritized higher. But I think Gangplank and Elise were the two most champions prioritized the most on blue side. So GP. I equate GP to the Ziggs of this kind of meta. And you have to think, how are Ziggs and Gangplank similar and how are they different? So Gangplank and Ziggs are similar in their ability to stall and their ability to wave clear. If you think about Ziggs Bouncing Bomb, it's pretty much Gangplank's barrels. If you think about Ziggs Mega Inferno Bomb, it's the Cannon Barrage. So your ability to clear waves. The differences are that Ziggs cares much more about Baron creeps than Gangplank does, because it's the difference between the magic damage and the physical damage, and how much more effectively Gangplank can clear against Baron waves than Ziggs can. So I think that's really what cements Gangplank on kind of this next level. Likewise, the ability to find an AoE crit is a damage stealing that Ziggs never really saw that Gangplank can and now does. In terms of cost efficiency though, and where I have a hard time justifying Gangplank, it's in his itemization and his build. So he has one of the most expensive builds in the game when he becomes online. So we talked about, the power breakpoints for Rise and Lissandra really being on those two items, the Rod of Ages and the Archangels for Rise, and the Abyssal Scepter into the Hourglass for Lissandra. Now Gangplank is going to be your Trinity Force into your Affinity Edge into your Ghost Blade on top of Lucidity boots. And it's really on these 3 or 4 core items that Gangplank gets to come online. So it's the difference between being relevant at 18 to 20 minutes versus 30 to 35 minutes. You just have to think, if games are averaging around, the 40 to 45 minutes, that's only 10 minutes to 15 minutes where Gangplank truly gets to be really relevant. Now, when Gangplank is relevant, it's catastrophic for teams. I mean, we saw multiple games throughout the Kespa Cup where it literally came down to a single crit AoE barrel that just ended teams. We saw CJ Intis do it on top of a Baron Pit, and we saw Ever probably more famously do it to SKT and the choke point on blue buff. And it's times where that would be like, yeah, I completely justify Gangplank, the fact that a champion has that potential power, but you also have to understand the conditions in which that comes with. Personally, I think Gangplank takes far too much ramp time to be effective. I think that reflects in his win rate coming into the final of Ever versus CJ Intis, the fact that he had such an abysmal win rate, despite the fact that he was a very high prioritized banned champion. And you go back to the Ever versus SKT game where Gangplank effectively won it, and SKT were diving inhibitor towers in a very overzealous and over-aggressive move that was then punished. So, there were conditions and there were variables that I think led to that series of Ever winning it. Scout playing the overzealous dive rather than, oh, this is the true power of Gangplank, bow before his mastery. That said, I understand the mentality. Likewise, in the 1v1 matchup of Gangplank versus Rise, you're able to cleanse the CC lock that Rise is able to put down, so you're offered a lot more safety. And again, you have a ramping wave clear, and that's something that Rise really struggles with, although it's not as prevalent on Gangplank early as it is other champions like Lissandra. So that's the meta. I think it's a very structure-focused meta. It's about pushing down these towers as quickly as possible, amassing that global gold lead, creating space, making picks. You think about the team that really defined this meta. I think it was SKT on the 5.18 Worlds patch, and they defined it by push down towers, amass gold lead, take it into the 5v5 dragon fights, take Baron very early, and in the game, within 3 to 4 minutes of having that Baron buff. And that was something that they're very indicative and famous for at this last World stage. So even though we have relatively slow games on the Caspa Cup, 40 to 45 minutes, we see a lot of Gangplank. I think it's not indicative of the elite team in Korea, despite the fact that SKT did not win, although I think that was lack of preparation. So coming on to tournament implications, because again, I've been talking a lot about Caspa Cup, but obviously it's the last tournament kind of coming into IEM where we saw the kind of the same patch, and we're trying to extrapolate some theories from it. We have tournament implications. So when people were looking at the Caspa Cup, some people were saying this is going to be, greater than Worlds. It has such a high skill ceiling because you have so many incredible teams participating. You have all the LCK teams as well as a lot of the Korean amateur teams participating. Sorry, I yawned. And I think that definitely proved to be a bit false in terms of how teams were taking the tournament. I mean, obviously you have the Tigers, you have KT Rolster, you have SKT, who looked frankly underprepared. I mean, I have no doubt that everyone's trying to win. There's never going to be an instance where teams like, it doesn't really matter. But obviously you have a lot of flexibility in these tournaments of what your expectations are. You have teams like Najin, like Jin Air, SKT, who were all playing with subs, giving their new rosters some time to strut and kind of figure out these growing pains and what direction they wanted to go in. You had teams like the Tigers who looked like they're like, you know what, let's just play 5.18 and let's just see what happens on 5.21. So I definitely think that it was I don't want to take away from the inherent value of the tournament. I think it did show a lot of interesting things, especially in the off season. Especially getting a look at some great up and coming talent, not only on Ever and Winners and Pathos, but also in Anarchy and Spinu and Jin Air and Najin. You got to see a lot of new players. You got to see more established LCK teams kind of really coming into their own identity, and I think there's a ton of value inherently in that. But you also have to understand that when you say Ever beat the best team in the world, SKT, and Ever have the potential to represent Korea at IEM Cologne if the roster stays together, that there are variables and conditions that come with that statement, and it's not just cut and clear that Ever beat SKT and they're the superior team. I definitely think that there were things that led up to this, and I think that's important to note coming into IEM San Jose. So X team wins IEM San Jose. Well, what are the actual implications of that as an off-season tournament? How much does that really mean in the global context of things when so many teams, TSM, CLG, Fnatic dropping out, Unicorns of Love coming in, bringing in completely different rosters, and some organizations even stating that these rosters aren't solidified for the coming season. So, not that this is a tryout ground, because obviously, again, teams want to win, but this is definitely to expose growing pains. You're pressed for time, pressed for practice. The live patch is going on right now. The preseason patch is live, and yet you're playing on 5.21. So, difference between the practice that you're getting in solo queue versus the practice that you're getting in competitive play. It's right after Worlds. A lot of organizations and teams, I mean, we're in this massive roster shuffle while we're trying to get ready for, a premier tournament. So I have no doubt that there will be validity and, merit to IEM San Jose, but I don't think it's fair to look at, tournaments like Kespa Cup, like IEM, and hold them in the same stature and regard of, this is right after Worlds. This is going to be the greatest tournament. It's got so much more talent. This is going to be exciting. What do these teams look like in the offseason? Have they learned anything? What direction are we going to? Are we going to see any new blood talent? Who's going to look the best setup going into spring 2016? So I think that's the underlying most important thing to take away from IEM San Jose. And, I look forward to it. I think it'll be fun. Now, segueing into team expectations. So if the tournament implications and the expectations of the tournament itself are not necessarily of the highest competitive integrity, just because we have so many roster swaps and so much happening kind of last second where it's all falling into place. You have to expect, what will CLG, what will TSM, what will those teams actually look like? Will this big, double if TSM thing really take off, or can we give them a break that, okay, they just got together, obviously they need to smooth things over, will they just come back? I mean, you've got two different polarizing opinions. If TSM come out and they look fucking amazing, they're fantastic, it's like, yes, this is exactly what TSM needed, this is the roster change, this team's going to be golden. But if they do fail, will people be able to back up and say, okay, hold on, guys, this roster just got together, obviously they're probably working out things, they've got new coaching staff, or again, if the other way, if TSM do great, it's, they were awesome, but it was at IEM San Jose, and everyone was running different rosters, relative competitive value. LGD. Let's talk about LGD. Oh, let's not talk about LGD. Team expectations for LGD. So LGD are one of the few teams going that actually have a consistent roster. They're taking their starting roster, which should give them a positive leg up into the competition. But again, faults are, is the last time that we saw this current iteration of the roster was at Worlds, and that was a massive underperformance and very poor showing from LGD, so that's the last benchmark that we have to go off. At NESO, they decided to run TBQ from their jungle position into their AD carry position because Imp did not play. So the most recent showing of LGD are them not playing together as a team. So you have to make the theory that they're not taking the time in between Worlds and IEM San Jose to practice and to grind and to refine the problems that they showed at Worlds. So there's no track record that everything that went wrong at Worlds has been fixed for LGD. So you have the positive that, yes, it's the current starting roster, the negative that, well, the most recent showing wasn't the starting roster, and they really haven't looked like they've shown anything. Now, the results at NESO were quite poor, but again, you have the variables and the specific conditions, and I think that tournament, with those in mind, pretty much becomes a wash and shouldn't be held against them in terms of the performance, but more importantly, the fact that that time isn't being used to prep accordingly for this upcoming tournament. So, win conditions for LGD. They're one of the most stable rosters attending IEM. They also have an incredibly high domestic skill ceiling that they've yet to show on an international stage. Loss conditions for LGD. The last showing that we saw with this current iteration of the roster was very poor. Likewise, they have not shown yet on a resume that they can perform at an international event. So, question mark, will we see this LGD that showed up at Worlds, or will we see this LGD that dominated the LPL playoffs? A lot of wiggle room there, a lot of up and downs. Kind of like the theme of IEM San Jose. I feel like it's just like a question mark, like, who will show up? Exciting tournament, because I'm super excited to see. I'm actually really excited to see CLG's roster. Big CLG fan, so hope it stays alive. Jin Air, that was the other team that I really wanted to speak to. So Jin Air pretty much has 3 new players that they worked in on Kespa Cup, mid, jungle, and top lane. And then they have they ran Pilot and Che in their support position and their AD carry position. So same support AD, different mid, jungle, and top. Now the thing about Jin Air is they play a very smart, slow, macro-oriented game. And it's hard to say slow because there's some games where Jin Air just wildly snowball out of control by making really smart map play, but then they just don't know how to close games. And this has kind of been the loss condition for Jin Air, is that they're not able to effectively press their leads, and so they lose in late game 5v5s when they've pretty much been in control of the game for majority of its duration. And that's heartbreaking to watch. So when you see subs come in on 3 out of 5 positions, you think that the identity of the team is about to change. Now, I had a discussion with Papa Smithy, and he brought up some really smart points. And obviously, he has much more exposure and experience with teams, the LCK teams, than I do, just casting that region more frequently. And his thing was that this is the first time that Jin Air have had a pressure point on the map in terms of their top laner, Sohan. He's a Riven main, hard carry style top player, and it's unique for Jin Air to have someone who creates and draws pressure on the map, because before you would have maybe top 5 players or players across every position in Jin Air who would be in the top 5 of Korea. So you had very good players, but it was kind of like, who's the carry? And a lot of people looked at Chaser because he was kind of a carry-oriented jungler. But they needed someone like Trace to step up. Occasionally GBN would step up, Pilot or Captain Jackie. But it wasn't clear like who was going to be the hard carry, who were we feeding these resources into, and it kind of became Chaser's role. And so he thinks that it's very interesting that you now have an iteration of Jin Air where you can drop map pressure, and how Jin Air will play around that. Now, my thing is it's almost a completely different roster, but it looked the same in terms of really long games, and you lose late because your inability to 5v5 on an effective and consistent level. And that's concerning for me, looking at a team, just because so much of this has changed, then why hasn't the core identity of the team changed? And that was maybe a small sample size, so it's hard to say that that's going to be the expectation every single time for Jin Air. So I'm excited to see how they perform at IEM San Jose, if they'll use the same roster that they used in Caspa Cup, or if they'll go back to their old roster, obviously without GBM. But in terms of their initial debut, it looked the same. It had the same end result that most Jin Air games do, but there was some bright spots of getting that Riven and showing that carry potential, or Winged making some very high mechanical plays on his Lee Sin. I thought he was a great Lee Sin. The new mid laner, I think, is very cerebral, very intelligent about how he plays around the map. He looked like he had great synergy with Winged, at least he did in the Caspa Cup, so really excited to see that. Other than that, I think I covered everything. Tried to do it in a quick and efficient manner. Patch, tournament, team expectations. Obviously, I didn't speak a ton about TSM and CLG and Unicorns of Love and teams like that. I have no idea what to expect from them. I hope they perform well. CLG fan, please CLG, don't let me down.